Okay, hi everybody. Maria and I have been working on preparing for the next session of our training, and I would like to orient you to a few things with this video right now. So this will hopefully be about 10 minutes or so. Okay, so first, I'm going to ask each of us to do a self-assessment as homework. And the first part of the self-assessment is to review handouts 8 and 10. Okay, so here is handout 8. And handout 8 starts with a bunch of generic questions. And these are questions that are just relatively broad questions that you could ask a client to get to know them better and to start to talk about the specific ideas of our model. And then after these generic questions are these specific questions. And the idea of the specific questions is they essentially go target by target through our model. So we have self-awareness questions here, and then other awareness questions, courage, emotional expression questions, courage, self-disclosure questions. These are all the targets of our model that we've been looking at over and over again. And then for each of these targets, there's a set of live focus questions and out of session focus questions. And the idea is that the live focus questions are questions that you could ask a client in session about what's going on for the client right then and there in session with you as a way of assessing whether these targets are happening. So for example, you would ask the client with respect to self-awareness, what are you feeling right now? This is simply, are you aware of what you're feeling right now? How in contact with your body are you right now? Or are you noticing your internal away moves right now, if you want to use an ACT matrix term? Or are you aware of who and what is important for you right now in this moment? So again, the live focus is like literally what's happening right now between you and the other person. And then the out of session focus is the same targets, but in the client's life outside of session. So in general, are you aware of what you're thinking and feeling as social interactions are happening? Or applying it to a specific relationship. Okay, so when you were having that interaction with that person, were you aware of what you needed? Were you aware of what your values were? Were you aware of what your goals were? Were you aware of who you really are and who you really want to be? So these are lots of examples of specific questions to ask in session and just about the client's life to help you really zero in on these targets of our model as appropriate for the client. And I won't go through all of the other examples now, but this is a whole bunch of questions. What I want to ask you to do for this homework is ask these questions about yourself. Ask these questions about yourself in the context of our group or in other relationships that matter to you, and start to give yourself an assessment of where you stand on these things. That's handout 8. Now, handout 10 is here. Handout 10 is similarly organized by the targets of our model. So we have self-awareness and other awareness and courage and so forth, all the way down through all the targets. But then we have examples of what CRB1s might be for each target and CRB2s, what they might be for each target. So for example, let's go to the courage emotional expression target, which is essentially what we were playing with Alan's client in session the other day. CRB1s related to emotional expression, in other words, in-session problems related to emotional expression, would be a client who is avoidant of vulnerability in these interactions, stays superficial, changes topics. Perhaps a client who answers feeling questions with thoughts, or a client who is actively avoidant, hostile towards or dismissive of emotions, like, I don't want to talk about that, or what is the use of that, or showing emotion as a weakness. So these are all examples of CRB1s related to this particular target. And then in this column, we have CRB2s related to the target or the improvements that we'd want to see. So for this client, it would be things like able to express vulnerability in both nonverbal and verbal ways in interpersonal interactions, or able to cry in front of others without overly apologizing, or when self-disclosing, the client does so in a way that is experienced by others as authentic and genuine. So you can go through this whole list yourself and do a self-assessment with respect to all of this. And the idea is that you'll look at handouts 8 and 10, and this will help you with this first part of the assignment. So step number 1, review handouts 8 and 10 for the purpose of familiarizing yourself with the handouts and starting to do your self-assessment. And then complete your own self-assessment by using the following scale. A scale essentially of 1 to 7, with 1 being completely false and 7 being completely true. And I will give you all of this as well. So use the following scale to assess yourself in the context of our group and in your clinical work. And so basically it looks like this. There's a question for each of our targets of the model. I am aware of my feelings and needs as they are actually happening. Quick awareness self-assessment. Give yourself a score of 1 to 7. I am aware of others' feelings and needs as they are actually happening. Give yourself a score of 1 to 7. And again, thinking about the context of our group. And I won't read each of these questions right now, but basically we have questions for each of the targets of our model. So you can do an assessment of where you stand on each of these. I have the good fortune of working with Maria, who has graciously done this herself. And her ratings were that she feels very aware of her feelings and needs as they're actually happening. She thinks that's a strength of hers. And so she gave herself a 7. That's the highest score. And she also feels that she's pretty aware of others. So she gave herself a 6. She feels that she's relatively emotionally expressive and congruent. That's not a big problem for her. So she gave herself a 5. And she thinks she's very good at helping others feel safe and accepted in response to their expression, a 6 or a 7. Here's where Maria said she wants to do the most work, simply authentically sharing what she's feeling and thinking. And specifically here in the United States, because it's difficult for Maria to she's worried about how she sounds in English, and that sometimes kind of keeps her a little more silent than she wants to be. So that's why it's lower there. She gave herself a high score for expressing understanding and validation. And she gave herself not applicable for asking what she needs because it just doesn't show up that much in our group. She's just there to kind of do the group, which is fine. She gave herself a high score for giving, and she gave herself a 5 for accepting love and appreciation from others. And so from this quick self-assessment, we would actually focus on, oh, I apologize, and there's a last question here. I express closeness and connection to others, also a 5. So from this quick self-assessment for Maria, we would actually focus on this low score here, this number 3 under self-disclosing and authentically sharing what she's feeling and thinking. So the purpose of the self-assessment is to identify what's the thing you want to work on, which would be indicated by a relatively low score as you assess yourself. Then with that self-assessment, I want you to complete your own conceptualization of O's and CRBs related to that particular target. So I want to keep this kind of small and just specific to one target, not a whole conceptualization, but just what does that one CRB look like? And so again, for Maria, the CRB2 is essentially what we just identified. The low score shows up as the CRB2. This is what we want to do more of. This is what Maria wants to work more on. And so the way Maria and I put it when we were talking about this was she wants to authentically share what I am thinking and feeling with others during the group, with awareness of my fear of speaking in English rather than letting that fear slow her down. The CRB1 would be when she lets the fear of speaking in English keep her quiet. So that's how we can go from that assessment to a conceptualization at a behaviorally specific level without getting into a whole conceptualization of everything that's happening in Maria's life, just keeping it simple at one level. And then from this in-session conceptualization, we can talk about the O's. This would be now, how does this show up in her clinical work? Or in this case, because we're working together here in the United States, it was a little hard for us to conceptualize this, but it was basically the O1 was when she lets me do most of the talking in other meetings that we are having together. And then the O2 would be Maria more fully engaging and participating in English in all of the meetings that she's having with me. So now you could say, well, maybe Maria should be doing this right now, and that would be the O2, and we could talk about that. But I think Maria and I were pretty good that she wanted me to, she wanted me to do this. Okay, so in session, that's your homework. And then in session, we're going to briefly share these conceptualizations with each other. We'll each have about 5 minutes, and we'll discuss what we need in response to our CRB2s. So for example, Maria says in response to her speaking in English, she appreciates validation of the difficulty of speaking in English versus telling her how good her English is. And what was nice is that the other day in session, Suzanne, you actually did both of those things. You were really validating of the difficulty, and then you said, and your English is really good. And so Maria is saying what's really helpful is the first part, and the second part isn't as helpful. And what's nice about Maria saying that, giving us that feedback, is it really fits this model really well. Because Maria is saying her goal is to self-disclose more in a context in which it's a little risky for her because she's insecure about speaking in English. And so since she's self-disclosing more, what she really needs in response is just this validation versus feedback or reassurance or anything like that, which would really be down here giving her something more specific. And it's essentially not where Maria's at. Maria's not asking for that kind of feedback. She just wants to work on self-disclosing and getting validation in response. And that's actually a really good example of how the model works for a lot of clients. Okay. So that's that piece of it. Now, after we do the conceptualizations in session, we're then going to do another round of disclosures like we did a few weeks ago. If you remember, a few weeks ago, we did negative event disclosures. This week, we're going to do positive event disclosures. The negative event disclosures and the positive event disclosures show up here in the model. We're just doing these different kinds of self-disclosure. And for a quick review, this is the slide I put up a few weeks ago. There are these different kinds of self-disclosures that we're working through. Negative events, memories, and feelings. Positive events, memories, and feelings. Disclosures of our identity, and disclosures of gratitude and affection. Okay, so a brief discussion of why we're sharing positive events. I'll just share a little bit from the literature with you. The literature actually calls the sharing of positive events capitalization. And the idea is that a positive event is a good thing in and of itself. Positive events make people feel good, but you can capitalize on that goodness by sharing the positive event with others. And there's a decent amount of research on this, that when you share the positive event with others, it improves your mood. It actually improves your memory for the event, so you'll remember the details of it longer and longer into your future, which is nice. And it improves how close you feel to the people who you've shared the event with. It turns out actually that the responsiveness side to sharing positive events, when somebody shares an event with you and you respond well, that good response to the sharing of a positive event is more predictive of intimacy in the relationship than how you respond to negative event disclosures. It turns out responding well to positive event disclosures is really important to intimacy, and so that's why we want to practice this. Okay. So the last thing I'll say about this is that the sharing of positive events can be a very vulnerable experience, and that's actually what we want to lean into when we share with each other. The goal is to share what is truly special and personal about the experience in an emotionally authentic way. So I'm going to give you all a choice of what to share. You can choose any one of these questions, or you could pick something else if there's just another positive event in your life that feels meaningful for you to share. But question number 1, describe a memory of pure, simple love exchanged between you and another. You can read the rest of these yourself and choose, but I'm just highlighting this one because when I've done this exercise, that's actually the one that I tend to focus on. And when I've answered that question in the past, personally, I've actually shared this picture with people, which I think I shared with all of you during my negative event disclosures. This is Zoe when she was much younger. lying on my chest. And it's a positive event, I think, for both me and Zoe. And when I think of pure, simple love, I imagine this feeling of Zoe cuddling up with Zoe when she's younger, and just the pureness and the beauty of it, and just the softness. And I remember the sunlight on my face in this picture, and I remember how she felt. And as I shared with you all a couple of weeks ago, for me, my relationship with Zoe, my relationship with my wife too, is so special, because I wasn't optimistic I was going to have a love and a family and a daughter that was so beautiful and amazing when I was younger. And I'm just full of gratitude and love and appreciation for this in my life. So I'm not going to give you the whole thing, but that's a little bit of how I would kind of do my disclosure. I would, again, I have the benefit of a picture, but I would share a story like this about my love for Zoe. That would be me describing a memory of pure, simple love. So you could choose something like that to share in your group, or you could choose any of these others if you want. This is how we'll do it. We'll do it in small breakout groups. You'll review the questions, you'll pick the question you want, and then each person will have 4 minutes to offer your response to the question. And then we'll be in groups of 4. And so the other 3 of you will listen, and you will collectively have 3 minutes total to respond to the person. And so total, each person has about 7 minutes. 4 people in the group. The whole exercise should take 7 times 4, or 28 minutes or so. We'll see how that goes. So that's it. That's sort of a long, took longer than I thought, but hopefully this is useful and a good preparation for the week. So have a good weekend. As always, any questions, feel free to send them our way, and I'll do our best to respond. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody on Tuesday. Okay, goodbye.